So this is a story called The Luck of Mary McPhee. And Mary McPhee always thought of herself as being lucky. She said, I'm a very lucky woman. A lot of people would have questioned that. She was not rich. She lived alone in a small cottage on the edge of a small village. Her husband, John, had died 10 years before, and they'd had no children. So her only companion was her orange cat, Clementine. But she maintained that she was lucky. She was well liked and well regarded by everyone in the village. They would often call upon Mary to bring a new child into the world. She cared for the very old, the very young, the very sick, and with such care and such grace. Did they pay her? Well, sometimes she made a few coins with her efforts, but more often than not, it was a few potatoes, maybe a cabbage, and likely nothing at all. Still, she considered herself lucky. And one morning, there was a knock at Mary McPhee's door. She opened it to see Kate, the daughter of a friend who lived on the outskirts of the village. Will you come and help, Mary McPhee? She said. What is it, Kate? Oh, she said, her eyes were brimming with tears. My baby brother is sick, and my mother is sick too, and my father is off with the fishing, and I just can't. Oh, of course, child. You are a brave and capable girl, but no 10-year-old can be in charge of an entire household. I'll come right away. Just let me get my shawl. And taking her gray shawl from the peg by the door, Mary McPhee wrapped it around her shoulders, and then she followed Kate back to her house. Well, things were just as Kate had described. The baby was crying. The mother was weeping. There was laundry and dishes everywhere. Mary McPhee took charge right away. First thing she did was she tucked that mother into bed for a little well-needed rest. And then she turned her attention to the baby. She fed the baby, she changed the baby, and then she sang him lullabies until he was asleep. Then she put a big pot on the stove to make a warm and nourishing stew. And then she and Kate tackled the dishes and the laundry. With the dishes, Mary washed and Kate dried the dishes, and they both worked on the laundry. And finally, when a couple of hours passed and the mother woke up much refreshed from her nap, the three of them sat down to stew and fresh baked bread. Oh, Mary, said the mother, I cannot thank you enough. And I'm afraid that I cannot pay you either. Oh, no worries, said Mary McPhee. I am paid well enough by the smiles from your baby and the companionship of your daughter. Well, will you stay the night, Mary? It's getting dark. Oh, no. Clementine, my cat, will miss me, but I'll check in on you in a day or two just to make sure you're all right. And as it happens, I know that it's a full moon tonight, so it will light my way home. And wrapping her shawl again around her shoulders, she set off for home. Down the path, she looked up into the sky, and it was a full moon. Oh, she said, I'm so lucky, a full moon to light the path. But maybe because she was looking at the moon, she wasn't looking down at her feet. And so she tripped and almost fell over something that was lying in the path. She looked, and it was a large iron pot. Oh, what luck, she said. Oh, an iron pot, that's useful. And she went to pick it up, but it was heavy. And looking inside, she realized why. The pot was filled with gold coins. Oh, she said, now that's a piece of luck. What I could do with this? Why, I could leave my little cottage and I could get myself a palace. I could probably even have a maid. And chuckling to herself, she went to pick up the pot. It was too heavy to lift. So she took off her shawl and tied it around the pot and began to drag it behind her. But it was night and she'd been working all day. She was tired. She stopped for a catch of breath. And she looked back at the shawl and realized that what she thought she tied the shawl around an iron pot, but now she saw that it was a large lump of silver. Oh, she said, What luck! Well, I certainly didn't need a palace or a maid. But now silver, much can be done with silver. Why, I could get myself a pony to take me wherever I want to go, and a cow and some chickens for milk and eggs. And so saying, she tightened her shawl around that lump of silver and began to drag it behind her down the path. Stopping again to catch her breath, though, she looked and it wasn't a lump of silver at all. In fact, it was a large lump of iron. Oh, said Mary McPhee, what luck. Well, I don't need a pony. My legs are strong enough to take me wherever I need to go. And don't my neighbors give me as much milk and eggs as I can use? But now a lump of iron. Well, I could take that to the smith and he could make me a new cooking pot. Oh. So saying, she tightened the shawl around the lump of iron and began to drag it behind her. Finally, she reached her front door. She stopped and went to untie the shawl when she realized that what she had there was not a pot with gold coins, and it was not a lump of silver, and it was not even a lump of iron. It was just a large stone. Mary McPhee looked at that stone and she said, what luck! Well, I didn't need a palace or a servant or a pony or a cow or chickens or even a new cooking pot because my old one is just fine. But I was just saying to Clementine yesterday that what I could really use is a nice big stone to hold open the door of my cottage now that the weather's getting warmer. She went to pick up that stone, but to her great surprise, it began to shake. And then it seemed to sprout a leg, 2, 3, 4, a tail, a head, and then the creature whinnied. Oof. Well, Mary McPhee had heard a lot about magical creatures. She knew about kelpies that would take you with them down to the bottom of a loch and drown you. But looking into that creature's eyes, she didn't see malevolence, but more mischief. Will you go for a ride, Mary McPhee? Said the creature. Oh, that I will, she said. And so she grasped its mane and hoisted herself up onto the back of the creature, and soon they were flying practically across the land. Mary McPhee's long gray hair that was usually in a neat bun, it had come out of the bun and it was streaming behind her along with the ends of her gray shawl, and it did look for all the world like she was flying. Finally, the creature stopped at a crossroads, let her down and said, go on inside, Mary McPhee, they're waiting for you. Well, she looked this way and that, but she didn't see any dwelling of any sort. And then a thick mist arose. And when the mist dissolved, well, wasn't there a very large and very grand house? And she could hear music coming from inside, and the windows were all lit up. She could hear laughter and singing. Clearly, there was a celebration of some sort going on. So she approached the door and peered inside tentatively. Oh, what she saw! The place was lit up, but not with candles or with lanterns, but rather with silver blue flames that seemed to just be floating in the air. And the room was filled with people, but such people. These people had skin like marble and hair like spun silver. And they danced and sang and danced and sang. And then one of the men came over to Mary McPhee and extended his hand and said, will you dance, Mary McPhee? She said, oh, no, my dancing days are long gone. Why, I don't believe these old feet would remember the steps. But he pulled her into the middle of the dance, and she found that her feet did remember those steps that she'd learned as a girl. And in fact, they seemed to know some dances that she didn't even remember learning. And then someone called for a song, and Mary McPhee said, oh, no, I have never had much of a singing voice. But soon she found herself singing, and beautifully too, to much applause and much acclaim. And she danced and sang and danced and sang and laughed and laughed and laughed. And finally, she could see that it was getting light outside. The sun was coming up. And at the same time, the silver blue flames began to disappear, and the marble and silver people began to fade, And finally, that grand house faded as well. And Mary McPhee found herself standing at the crossroads with that creature next to her. Well, Mary McPhee, he said, time to go home. And so she climbed on his back, and soon they were skimming across the field. He set her down right in front of her front door. And then the creature disappeared as well. Thank you, she called after him. I had a wonderful time. And looking down, she saw that there in front of her door was a large stone. Oh, what luck, she said, exactly what I needed. And so Mary opened her cottage door. She propped it open with the stone. She brewed herself a cup of tea, and with her cat Clementine on her lap, she rocked in her rocking chair and stroked Clementine's soft fur and said, oh, Clementine, have I got a story to tell you? It's just as I've always said, I am a very, very lucky woman. And that is the story of Mary McPhee. I don't know for a fact that she was one of my ancestors, but I'm just going to go right ahead and claim her. And I hope that whoever your ancestors were, that you get some of that same kind of luck, and that your evenings are filled with laughter and singing and dancing and wonder.